Hello everybody, how's it going? It's me, Crendor, and welcome back to Crendor Talks in front of a shitty green screen. Today, I want to talk about more Age of Sigmar 4.0, specifically the new magic system and prayers, and I want to talk about flavor, because that's a word that gets thrown around everywhere, and I feel like nobody really describes what they mean about flavor. It's just like, this thing lacks flavor, like this edition of a game lacks flavor, this war scroll lacks flavor, like there's so many things that can lack flavor, but what does it actually mean? And I think it has different variations of what it means to people. Like some people find flavor in things that other people don't. So I want to talk about that a bit too. But first, let's jump into the casting in 4.0. So here we are. Cast supreme sorceries and chant powerful prayers in new Age of Sigmar. So casting and unbinding is pretty much the same in terms of you roll 2d6. And if you roll the thing, you get the thing, right? If it's a 7 to cast a spell, you roll 2d6. If you get it, you got it, right? It's like how it used to be. So a lot of people were like, they're going to remove magic from the game. It's going to be like 40k when they removed the psyker phase or whatever it was. They have not. So already, different design team, different everything. So thank God. And magic's such a big part of Age of Sigmar as well. Like, I don't think you could ever just get rid of it. However, you can see they've made the green puke spell that used to be on the Weird Knob Shaman's War Scroll into a ranged attack, which I actually think is good. I like that a lot. That was a spell that you would never really use. It was bad. It was just like, maybe if you had the ability to cast it, it was never used. So I think it's really cool to actually have it as a ranged weapon, and it shoots in combat as well, which you're not allowed to shoot in combat anymore, which is a thing in current Age of Sigmar. So that's also something we can talk about. But taking a look at the other stuff, the number in the brackets determines the number of spell, unbind, and banish abilities they can use per phase. So a hero with the keyword Wizard 2 could fire off a single spell and still attempt to banish an endless spell or invocation. So you can see he's Wizard 1, which means he can cast one spell and be done. He could cast no spells and have a banish or have a unbind, right? So that's pretty much the way it works, which I think is actually pretty cool. The one thing that I read here that I was like, huh, is it says per phase. Where does it say that? Followed by power level number, bright number spell that they use per phase, right here, right? Per phase. Not per turn, per phase. When I read that, I was like, wait, hold on. So like Nagash had Wizard 9. Does that mean in the hero phase, in the movement phase, and like every phase of the game, he can cast 9 spells or unbind 9 spells? Like, I think so. And I think at first I read that, I was like, that's crazy. But then I realized there's probably not enough spells for him to like really go crazy doing that. Like, I'm sure there are spells that occur in like the movement phase, the shooting phase, like kind of like in Warhammer Fantasy, how you cast magic missiles in the shooting phase. I think it's going to be like that. But I don't know. It's crazy that it's like per phase. That's what's blowing my mind. I'm like, I figured you would have to conserve it over the turn. I thought it was like per turn, but we'll see. I don't know. That's the thing that confused me the most. But anyway, spell lores have changed in the new edition and are selected as part of constructing your army. Pick a single spell lore, and every sorcerer in your army can attempt to cast spells from that lore. This means you no longer need to keep track of which specific Weird Knob Shaman knows Mighty Headbutt. You can attempt to cast it with any of them, which this is fantastic because there are so many times, dude, so many times where you're just like, oh man, I gave this guy the spell that buffs up these guys, and then they like run away and that wizard never sees them again. But then some other wizard near them is like, I've got a spell that's completely useless because the other thing, like, there were so many situations where you would take a spell, you would do it like right away, and then you would like never do it again. Or maybe you had like, if it was like a skink star priest, right? You had to like teleport him over there and then keep casting the spell and be like, wait, which skink star priest did I give that spell to? I think it was this one. And that, so it got pretty confusing and dumb. And what I love most about this is it encourages spell it encourages you to use a variety of spells, because right now people just take the strongest spells, right? If you have the option of taking Comet's Call or like some spell that removes an artifact from your opponent's general, you're going to take Comet's Call. Like every time, right? But now, if you're in a situation where you're like, hey, you know what? I could Comet's Call, but he's got a pretty good artifact and I'm in range. So like, maybe I'll just try to get rid of it, right? And so it encourages you to use your entire spell lore, which I think is great. Some people were like, oh, I wish it was more like the fantasy system, but I think this is a pretty cool system. This is much improved compared to what we currently have. So I like that a lot. Then that's Mighty Headbutt. He's got a spell that does stuff. Cool. But it does say your hero phase. So that does make me think there are spells in other phases. That's just what I think. I mean, it might just say every spell might just be like your hero phase or something, but I do think we're gonna see some more that are in other phases. So no more than one friendly wizard can cast the same spell each turn unless it has unlimited, which allows you to cast it, but now with the same wizard. So if, you know, Comet's Call had unlimited, your Slan could cast it, but he couldn't cast it again. So it'd be like your Slan could cast it, your Skink Star Priest could cast it, your, you know, Lord Crow can, like, everybody can cast it once. So I'm sure those spells are going to be something that they're very careful with. Obviously, you don't want everybody casting the same broken spell over and over, right? And then Unbind. A friendly wizard within 30 of casting the spell, you make an Unbind roll, and if it's exceeding the roll, the spell is unbound. So same way it works right now. It's an important part of counterplay, and with magical intervention, letting canny casters crack off spells in their opponent's hero phase, the Unbind reaction ability is vital. So yeah, there's that command that allows you to cast in your opponent's your opponent's turn. So that could be pretty wild. Or I guess hero phase. I don't know if it's like any of the other phases, but or if we even have other phases. I don't know. I'm just making assumptions here, but it's still pretty cool. So I like that a lot. I mean, so far I'm loving the magic system. Then we have prayers. Okay, and prayers have like completely changed. So I've used a decent amount of prayers as somebody who plays Skaven. I've ran numerous plague monks, or not plague monks, plague priests. I don't know why I couldn't even think of plague priests. We're talking about priests. So priests are marked out by a keyword with an associated power level, and you may use a combination of prayer and banish abilities each phase up to that number. So when you do a prayer, the way I believe it works is you say, I'm going to do a prayer, and you roll a dice, right? People are really confused by this. And then on a 2-up, you gain that many prayer points, and then you're allowed to cast a prayer. That's the way I read it. So they say, like spellcasters, you'll pick a specific prayer lore when building your army, but there's similarities. That's where the similarities end. Instead of making a casting roll, you do a chanting roll. Each prayer will ask you to roll a d6 chanting roll, and you roll a 2+. Your priest gains that many ritual points, which accumulate over multiple turns. So you get ritual points. I'm calling them prayer points. I think prayer points is fun. Each prayer has a chanting value you'll need to match before it'll be answered, and include a higher value which can power up the resulting miracle even further. For example, a slaughter priest can choose to unleash the Witchbane Curse to weaken an enemy wizard once they've gathered 4 points, or you can hold out for 8 and do an additional 3 mortal damage to them on top of the 4-point effect. Building up your rituals comes with risk, and the gods of Sigmar can be petty, so chanting rolls of 1 will make you lose d3 points, which I think is great. Instead of taking mortal wounds on my like 5-wound hero that's like, oh, I guess he's just half dead because he failed a prayer. Note that prayers can't be unbound, which is pretty crazy, actually. The fact that magic has like this system of unbinding, but prayers don't. I don't know. That seems kind of weird. I feel like there's got to be some sort of counterplay to this, right? Aside from just like kill the priest. Like maybe other priests can spend points to stop a prayer from happening. Like, I don't know. I feel like there's got to be something, because otherwise priests might get crazy. I don't know. I guess we'll find out. I think it's cool, though. I like this system because you're just accumulating points. You might risk it and go for big time prayers and get like bonus effects and stuff. So I think it's pretty cool. I'm happy with that. I like this more than the current prayer system we got going. So we'll also see how busted the prayers are. That'll probably play a big effect. And then manifestation lore, which is like your endless spells, your old invocations, I believe. So they're still in the mix, but instead of spending points to add them when constructing an army, you can pick a lore, a manifestation lore. This grants access to a selection of endless spells and invocations you'll be able to summon in battle. Some factions have their own, while current are, you know, it's endless spells and invocations, everything. So, blah, blah, blah. Wizard and priest can both attempt to use banish manifestation, which is fantastic, because currently a priest would just summon some invocation, and you're like, I guess I don't have a priest, so it's just there. So that sucked. So that's great. I mean, everything they've showed here seems really cool. I'm happy about it. And yeah, that's that's that. So I'm cautiously optimistic. Although I'm becoming more and more optimistic without the caution. Like, I'm starting to really, after reading a lot of these articles, it's a lot of things that I'd hoped they'd do for the game, and it's making me believe. I'm not gonna lie. So wait, this is the community. Here's where I wanted to go. Okay, so now I want to talk about flavor. All right, so we have the combat article here talking about like how combat works, the combat abilities sequence, some ability examples, some commands you can use, or not commands, just abilities you can use, like charge, fight, you know, just things that happen. Pile-in moves, retreating is another big one. So I mainly want to focus on the Kroxigor War Scroll and retreating, and I do kind of want to talk about shooting a little bit for the same reasons. So flavor. What is flavor? A lot of people say this new edition of 40K lacks flavor, or like this thing lacks flavor. So I'm going to tell you what I believe flavor is. To me, flavor is when I play a game, and when I play an army in that game, I feel like I'm playing that army. Like I am the general of an army in a realistic battle with that army, right? That's how I view flavor a lot of times. Because you could just be like, otherwise you're just playing like chess or something, right? Like, does chess have flavor? I mean, I guess it can. It has different pieces that have different moves, which add flavor, right? And so I think in the current version of Age of Sigmar, I actually don't think there's as much flavor as people think. I think some armies actually have really good flavor, and some armies have terrible flavor. For example, I like Nurgle a lot because of you have the wheel, so you're like constantly getting these different effects. You have disease points, so you're like diseasing your enemies. You have, you know, everybody moves really slow, but they're really resilient and tanky. They have 5-up wards. They generally have higher health, but right, you're slow. That's the trade-off, right? So you're like, oh man, this sucks. You know, I guess I slowly like, and you're moving around. That's very flavorful to me. That's why Nurgle's one of my favorite armies. Now, if we go over to Seraphon, I actually think Seraphon doesn't feel as fun or flavorful to me, partially because it feels like it's trying to do too much. So for example, let's take a look at the Kroxigor. Some of it's trying to do too much. Some of it's just like, I think they did terrible jobs on some of the War Scrolls. So I want to give an example here with Kroxigor, right? So I just talked about how Nurgle is very flavorful to me because it feels like I'm playing Nurgle when I'm playing the game, right? So currently Kroxigors have 5 wounds, but for most of it, they had 4 wounds for most of the edition. And that just made them feel bad. Like they didn't feel like Kroxigors, you know what I mean? So taking a look at this War Scroll and seeing them at 6 health already makes me be like, that's adding flavor. And some people might not see that as flavor. They might be like, that's just, you know, the War Scroll, whatever. But like, to me, that adds flavor, because when you're on the table and you're playing the game and somebody sees your Kroxigors, they're like, wow, those are some big gators, right? Those are some big dino gators. I bet that thing is hard to take down. And you're like, actually, he's really weak. He's got 4 health. He's got a 4-up save. If you just do a couple more wounds, they're dead. Like, that doesn't feel flavorful. It's just like, oh, okay. But now it's like, oh, they have 6 health each. Like, the 3 Kroxigors currently equal 2 4.0 Kroxigors. Like, now you have 18 health on 3 Kroxigors instead of 12. Like, that is a huge difference. On top of the fact that they're apparently going to be lowering a lot of mortal damage, or it's going to be much more precise in what they allow mortal damage to do. So we're going to see. But here's what I love about this too, right? So Kroxigors have they're 2 weapons. They have the champion weapon, which is the Drake Bite, or no, the Moonstone Hammer, and then the Drake Bite Mauls are just your standard weapons. So you're gonna have 8 attacks, 4s by 2s, 1 rend, 2 damage, and then the Moonstone is the same thing, but one better hit, 1 better damage. So then you have this passive, which is Kroxigors swing their weapons in wide arcs, smashing aside multitude of foes with each blow. And they add 1 to the damage if the attacks the target enemy unit have 10 or more models. So now all of a sudden you're doing 8 attacks, 4 by 2, 1 rend, 3 damage, and 4 attacks, 3 by 2, 1 rend, 4 damage. And on top of that, you have this ability for anti-infantry, which is going to give you a bonus rend. So if you're fighting against infantry, all of a sudden, if you're fighting like a pack of like 20 just infantry guys, right? You're now on 4 attacks, 4 by 2, 2 rend, 3 damage, and 4 attacks, 3 by 2, 2 rend, 4 damage. Like, you're going to be chunking this stuff. So the Kroxigors now have this defined role, right? You now see them on the battlefield, and you're like, dude, these Kroxigors got these giant mallets. What are they going to do? They're going to be hard to kill, and they're going to be going like just wiping out hordes of stuff. Now, that doesn't mean they can't just go into something else and kill it, but it means as the controller of the army, you want to take this unit that is an anti-infantry unit and get it into their infantry and wipe it out, right? That's what you want to do. And then they see that and they go, oh boy, I don't want those things getting anywhere near my infantry. I'd rather they get into like, you know, something I can tie them up with and then, you know, or shoot them off the table or something else, right? So it becomes this back and forth game now. And to me, that's where a lot of flavor is. And I think they seem to be defining a lot of unit roles. And I think unit roles in themselves are also adding flavor because now it feels like you're actually playing a real war game. And I think a lot of time in Age of Sigmar 3.0, there's just a lot of unit spam. There would just be people running like the same thing over it. Like I have like 12, you know, Necropolis stalkers, and then they like spam some other shit. Or it just like didn't feel like an actual army. And it feels like now you can do that, but you're not going to get that bonus command point. You're probably not going to get some, you know, some sort of bonus for being in a regiment, or I don't remember what they called it, battle formation, or the thing where you take a hero and then they can take other stuff and you get whatever, right? So it seems like they're trying to encourage this. They're trying to encourage more variety within the army. They're trying to encourage you to not just spam one unit. Like, I'm going to run 300 zombies, right? Like, nobody wants to play against 300 zombies. It's boring. It is boring. There's going to be some guy that's like 300 zombies, like, I have a good time. I don't care. I would not have a good time playing against that. And nobody else probably wants to play against that either. Right? So it's just, I love the variety because it also doesn't feel very thematic. It's like, oh boy, here comes my army and it's just a bunch of zombies. So I guess we'll just fight the zombies, and they do a lot of damage for some reason. Like it never really made sense to me. So it becomes more of an actual war game. And I think that's how Warhammer Fantasy is. Like Warhammer Fantasy, many units have defined roles. And, you know, it's like, oh man, I want to try to maneuver my unit to get it into the thing that I'm trying to kill. And I hope that they don't tie up my thing in some way or shoot it off the table or I put it in a good spot. And it feels like they are trying to do this in like a Sigmar style. Like, and I think that's what I like so much about it. It feels like they're doing a little bit of fantasy stuff, but in a more simplified Sigmar style. And that's kind of what I want from Age of Sigmar. So that's where I think some of the flavor lies. I think some of the other flavor lies in the abilities, right? So I've seen a lot of people saying they took away the bites. So first off, they may have not taken away the bites. They may be like a hero regiment type thing where if the Kroxigors are with a Scar veteran or something, then they can use their bites because he's like trained them in the art of biting. It may just be an allegiance ability that's not on the war scroll to make things cleaner. Like there's a whole bunch of ways they can still add in bites. Just because it's not on the war scroll doesn't mean it's not there. But I can see where people might be like, okay, they're removing that, and that's like a thing they do because you're like, oh, but somebody else was like, where's the skink synergy? And like, I never used the skink synergy. The amount of times I cared about if a skink dies near you, you get like +1 to hit or whatever it was. nobody ever had that happen because your opponent would just be like, well, I don't want to kill any skinks near him, or just don't get near him, right? Or if like you're far away, just shoot him and then go hit the Croxiors. Like there's so many ways to play around it that it never even really felt flavorful. It was just like, it was a rule that felt like a badly written rule. Like just because something is there doesn't mean it's flavorful. I think a lot of people tie together more options with flavor. And I don't think that's actually true. I think you can have less options and the war scrolls and the units can actually still feel good, if not better. So another example, I play a lot of Lizardmen, so I'm like sticking with that, is Saurus Warriors, right? When I remember building my Saurus Warriors and I was like, do I want to build spears or clubs? And some people are like, they got rid of the option to build both. But like the annoying part with that is it would be like, okay, so if I build clubs, it's better for like getting into combat, but then my second row of guys isn't going to get in. But then what if there's a season where they add in that range and then my other guys can get in, but then, and it was just like, you were always just trying to figure out which was better in the current meta. And to me, that's not like flavorful. It's just, it's metagaming. It just becomes metagaming. And you can see that happen in Warhammer Fantasy when people are like, wow, I have so many options. I have so many magical items and so much magical armor and arcane stuff. And people just end up taking the same things over and over. Like, I'm going to take the Ruby Ring of Ruin. I fireball you. It's like, wow, maybe you want to try one of these other. No, I have the Talisman of Protection. I have the Ogre Blade. I have the Giant Blade. Like, people are just going to take the best things. And it's this illusion of flavor where you're like, I have so many options. And then people use the same things over and over. And so it doesn't even really feel that flavorful because people are just doing the same shit, right? It's the same with like 40K. People are going to take the same weapon detachments and people might be like, you know what? I will diversify. I will try something else. And then it sucks. And you're like, well, I tried it. So I don't know. That's why if they have something like Saurus weapons and you can just build them as swords, you can build them with spears, I think that's great. And I think it's easier to balance. And I just prefer that. Like I think the simplicity of it is fine. Like it's still a Saurus weapon. I'm sure you could, that way you can have spears, you can have clubs, you can build them however you want. And it's even just easier for you to build. You don't have to go out and buy more to build them with spears or something if you didn't have any spear Saurus warriors. You're actually saving money. So I don't know. I never really understood people kind of getting mad about that type of stuff. I could see it if like you build them with shields and then they get strong. But I mean, even then, I'm kind of like whatever. So the other thing is stuff like retreating or like playing the actual game. So that was mainly my War Scroll rant, right? So now it becomes playing the game. So for example, retreating. They did a thing where Battle Shock is gone. Thank God. I hated it. But retreat is now an ability used in the movement phase, a tactical decision that comes with a cost of D3 mortal damage. Though some wily units may be able to use special abilities to slip out of combat without reprisal, including certain Skaven. So I love this. I've seen some people complain about this, and I really don't know why, because to me, this is also very flavorful. Like, if you're retreating, you should suffer some sort of penalty, right? And I think taking a couple mortal damage, I mean, you might just take one mortal damage, like whatever, right? Or you might take 3, who knows, right? And because you're like literally leaving combat and you want to get out of it. So you're like, I think it is worth damaging my units to get out of this combat. I think it's a better decision. And you're like, okay, so maybe your guys turn to run and some guys like, and whacks them in the back, right? So to me, that's realistic. That's flavor. Like, to me, that realism of combat retreat is like flavorful. Like, oh, I just took some damage. It's the same reason some people say, why do I have to roll a 2-up on this ability to use it? It's like, well, because realistically, your guy's not going to be perfect every time, right? Even the best warriors, the best athletes, the best everybody at their craft or whatever, they might have a time where they mess up. And that's why you have to roll a 2-up. And it's just, that's also the game. It's a nice game, right? I don't know. So I think that's cool. And then on top of that, I think the flavor is that certain factions are able to ignore that. Like Skaven, you're like, oh yeah, that would make sense. 'Cause like Skaven don't have to, take the mortal damage because they're a little more like sneaky. They're always, wiggling around. They're retreating. Like that's what they do. And so you're like, oh yeah, it would make sense that Skaven just get to do that and not take any damage. Or maybe they have some other bonuses or whatever they can do, right? So to me, that's flavor. So it might not be flavor for somebody else. I don't know. I'm curious what you think down in the comments section below, because it makes sense to me, and that's what I enjoy in a lot of the games, is when things make sense, right? And I think playing a lot of Warhammer Fantasy also made me feel that way. It felt very flavorful. Like death armies felt like death armies. A lot of times when I play Sigmar, it didn't even feel very great when death would just bring back like hordes and hordes of shit. And you're like, I get that they bring back stuff, but like it hits a point where you're like, come on, man, this is getting crazy. Or even rallying. You would like take out a bunch of Fire Slayer units and they're like rallying on 4-up, so they're all back. And it's like, okay. Like it didn't even feel flavorful. It just felt like dumb. It just felt bad. So some people acting like we're going from 3.0 to 4.0 and they're like, the flavor's gone. It's like, if anything, I feel like this is way more flavorful. Just because we cut some rules out and take away some stuff doesn't mean it's losing flavor. I think some people are just mad that the thing that they do isn't doable anymore. I think that becomes a hard hit situation. The only other thing I wanted to mention was shooting, which is in the shooting phase, you now have to be out of combat to shoot. I don't really need this article anymore. You have to be out of combat now to shoot something, unless you specifically have the shoot in combat rule, which we saw earlier with the shaman guy, right? So if he's in combat, he can still be like and vomit all over you, which makes sense because he's in combat and he doesn't have to like ready a weapon and like do like he can just be like his vomits on you, right? So I get it, and you know it's flavorful. It makes sense. Like I think a lot of times things making sense also add flavor to me. Like maybe a guy with a flamethrower, a guy. Like maybe some elves maybe are able to, fire their bow in combat because they can ready it faster. They're like magical arrows and they're like trained over hundreds of years to fire it fast, right? Like there's plenty of situations where it makes sense to fire in combat, and that adds flavor because you're like, oh, I'm playing a faction where they do this thing, and this thing makes them who they are, right? And that's where a lot of flavor comes from, is the factions have things that define who they are, why they play the way they play, why they have the units they do, and they have strengths, they have weaknesses, and somebody's strength might just be that I can fire in combat. So maybe there's somebody that has an army and their whole thing is like, hey, you know what? Now I know that shooting ranges are shrinking, and I'm gonna try to get my cavalry on the flank, kind of like when you're playing Warhammer Fantasy, and I'm gonna try to go tie up those archers so they can just stop shooting me because it's annoying, right? But then if you're playing an army that can shoot in combat, you're like, uh-oh, that's not good. Or maybe that army that likes shooting is now like, uh-oh, I gotta protect my guys that are shooting because I can't have them getting tied up. This is pretty vital to what I'm doing. So now they have defenses and front lines to take the damage, where now you have like the where was it? Like the Ard boys, right? They have the shield bash Ard boys sitting in the front. They're just like, hey, if you charge me, these Ard boys are just gonna tank you and it's gonna be annoying. And you're like, uh-oh, right? So I think I really love that because right now it's like you get into combat with something that shoots and they just blow you up. Like that ends up happening a lot of the time. Now there's at least some sort of strategic counterplay happening. There's people thinking about moving their ranged units. And I think range damage is probably one of the strongest things in the game. I mean, you can see it in 40K. Like people try to put their stuff in cover at the start, and it's a completely different game because everybody's just trying to blast each other off the board before they start fighting in melee. While when you play Warhammer Fantasy or like Sigmar or something, I think it's supposed to be medieval style combat more than anything, right? Like you want primarily melee combat to happen, and range, it's doing damage without taking a penalty. Like when you're doing melee damage, you have the risk of getting hit. When you're doing range damage, you're like, I'm just chilling, right? It's the reason Lumineth would just sit back and fire sentinels into you, and it's annoying, right? It's the reason that people hate playing Seraphon when Lord Croak slams down and he's like, blah, 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 and he just like fires 400 mortal wounds on you and you're dead. It's not fun. There's no strategy behind it. There's not a lot of counterplay. It's just like, don't get hit, idiot. So to me, I think everything I've seen seems like they're making good choices. And I'm sure as we actually play the game, there's going to be some stuff that stands out. And it's like, you know what? This wasn't as much fun as I thought it would be, or this doesn't feel that great or whatever. But I think I have hope that they will adjust that and they'll change things. And obviously, you know, point values are going to play into a lot with army building and everything. But from what I've seen so far, everything seems flavorful. It seems fun. It seems like they're just trimming the fat off of a lot of stuff. And I'm excited to play some Age of Sigmar 4.0. So let me know down in the comment section what you think about anything I just talked about, really. And I'll see you next time. Okay? Okay. See ya.